Hello, I am Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be reviewing Magic the Gathering collab that is coming to North America on Monday or tomorrow. So, Magic the Gathering has quite a large following within North America, and what makes this collab extra exciting is that we are having a synchronized release with Japan, and that we're going to be receiving the collaboration at the same time. Well, basically the difference is only going to be our daily reset time. But the point of the matter is we're actually able to board this hype train as soon as it's departing from the station, instead of towards the very end when something newer and tastier has possibly been released or announced, at least in Japan. So, with that being said, players are able to actually acquire some powerful cards that can add some depth to their overall monster box, but overall, the collab itself is reasonably strong, but nothing is exceptionally powerful. There's no super standout, awe-inspiring, amazing card. Like, there's no equivalent like Edward or Yusuke's or those sort of ideas. So, to kind of compensate for this, all of the cards, at least from the 6-star or highest rarity, will have at least value, like similar levels of value, or at least the fact that they all have some usage. Like, compared to say like Full Metal Alchemist, Kenshin Collab, and YYH, a lot of the 6-star cards in those events were quite lackluster, and there was really just only one, maybe two true chase cards, whereas in this event, at least all the 6-stars have merits, and they can be used in a wide variety, shape, and form. So all the 6-stars can be exchanged for via the monster exchange system, but I would caution against actually exchanging duplicate 6-stars or even just a single 6-star for another one, because they are still powerful on their own. Now, this video will be reviewing all the cards in detail, kind of highlighting their pros and cons, as well as where you can expect to use them. So, there are 4 6-star cards as well as 7 5-star cards, and the ranking distribution is reasonable for the most part. Like, it's as expected, like the 6-star cards are obviously taking the top slot, but 2 5-stars are still reasonably powerful, and then the rest kind of just goes downhill from there. Now, I clearly didn't even click continue reading, whoops. So, now, before I review each card individually, there is going to be a weapon assist evolution for every single 6-star card. And a weapon assist evolution is a special evolution that is performed that basically cuts down dramatically the number of awakenings that a card has, but it also retains the exact same weighted stats that they had before. However, when they are inherited on another card, what few awakenings are left over are actually transferred over. So that enables a card to actually gain significantly more awakenings and tap into something that they would never be able to actually access otherwise. Furthermore, Weapon Assist inherits transfer their awakenings over through co-op and solo modes, so you actually can utilize them across all forms of gameplay, unlike Super Awakenings, which are restricted to only solo mode. Now, like I already mentioned before, all the 6-star cards have the Weapon Assist evolution. They also can be exchanged for the Monster Exchange, and they're all reasonable overall. Like, they're all reasonably powerful. So, the first card in the event is Karn, and Karn's active skill is a full health recovery, and then changes all orbs to light, hearts, and then jammer on an 11-turn cooldown. So a vanilla full board changer with hearts generally has an 8 or 9 turn cooldown or so. So when you add jammers in, it technically reduces the cooldown, but adding in the full heal tacks on extra turns at the same time. So that's why it kind of ended up at 11 turns. Now, his leader skill wants you to play a jammer orb. So you need 7 jammer orbs, so 2 combos, a 3 and a 4, to actually unleash full potential. But full potential is only 144 times, so we really don't want to really look at that, in all honesty. So, Karn's Awakenings are Bind Immune, which is expected. It's got skill boosts, 2 skill boosts actually, skill Bind Resist, Time Extend, and then 3 7 combo awakenings. So 3 7 combo awakenings translates into 8 times personal damage when you hit 7 or more combos. So you can expect great damage output from Karn himself. And then when he's transferred into a Weapon Assist evolution, he then gains 2 Light Rose, which no one cares about for the most part. 3 Poison Resist, which translates into 60% poison resistance, as well as a regular HP awakening. So, generally speaking, I would strongly advise you not to make the Weapon Assist evolution, just because he's much stronger off in his base form for the most part, because the types of teams you want to use him on, he generally has some synergy with. So, in terms of what is good that's going from his pros, he's got a full board changer that makes hearts, so that makes you able to heal as well as deal damage. The full HP heal can be valuable in certain teams. 777 combo is 8 times personal damage. Being Bind Immune is kind of standard nowadays. The weapon assist does give you 60% poison resist, but I caution you not to do that because Raytheon exists, and Raytheon is largely superior in every way, shape, and form because I'll explain why later. And then it's a jammer meta. Like, some people like that, and most people probably don't, so that's why it's under pros and cons. In terms of the drawbacks, the 11 turn cooldown is a little lengthy just because it's got that full health heal, which may or may not be necessary for some teams, and makes it harder to inherit over top of it because you may not be able to activate most leaders from that given board changer. He's only got 13 recovery as well as only 905 weighted stats, which is actually kind of about the baseline for all the 6-star cards in this event because this is a 5-stone machine event, and because of that, we don't actually have very strong weighted stats because, well, we have to make sure like those 10-stone events or like various 6-star Godfest exclusives have higher weighted stats to make those chase cards as well at the same time. Now, he does have a light typing or coloring, so that means he does not have a different color attribute, which is a drawback for Edward teams especially. And like I already mentioned, Raytheon is better because Raytheon gives you the same 60% poison resist, but he gives you a delay and a poison, which is more universally beneficial than a board changer that only really makes hearts and light as well as jammers. And then for the most part, yes, Karn is a 777 light card, but we have Ideal. And Ideal is far stronger in pretty much every way, shape, and form. And that's a bit of a drawback because judging from how Pad Academy worked, in that we could exchange for the top prize cards or 8-star cards, it is not a far stretch, again, it's speculation, that we could be able to trade for Ideal in the future. And if that's the case, I would much more gladly trade for Ideal than Karn because Ideal, again, has way more weighted stats. He's got a silly amount of recovery. It's got team health, awakening, and it's just a more universally beneficial active skill. And then another big problem with Karn is it's hard to actually find a really good team to utilize him on, and I'll explain why so in a moment. And then again, jammer meta. So being light is a very good thing to be because for the most part, light-based teams are the strongest ones currently available. So having 777 combo means you can deal spectacular amounts of damage. And right now, Edward and Yusuke are kind of dominating the meta, and both of those teams generally like to use light-based subs. However, the future evolution for Miru can actually utilize Karn quite well because of the light and hard board changer, the jammers you can match away at some point. So I want to focus on Edward teams first for Karn because it's actually a reasonable fit for the most part. So Edward teams have to actually maintain a 50% plus health threshold to deal their full multiplier. When you drop below, your damage is significantly reduced. So even though Edward can provide a heal on his own, having another healing active skill on what is a much shorter cooldown can be beneficial. Now, even though Edward does have skill charge, you're not always able to proc skill charge on every single board, so his 20 turn cooldown may be reduced, but it's still possibly going to be longer than Karn's 11. And when you enter a dungeon at the very beginning, the skill boosts take effect, and those don't necessarily help Edward as much as they would Karn because Edward has a 9 more turn cooldown to deal with. So Karn will come up much faster and you can have that full health heal. Furthermore, Edward teams do not rely on any specific colors to match for activation, they only care about combos. So the board changer can be activatable, which is a big deal. Now, like I mentioned, he has no different color sub-attribute, and that is a drawback because Edward wants to tap into that skill charge awakening, and if you don't tap into that skill charge awakening, you're going to wait for a prolonged period of time to actually use Edward's active skill. So because of that, you're going to have to find from your other 3 subs, water, wood, and dark in order to actually trigger that skill charge, so that can be a bit of a drawback. Now, I already touched upon that Miru would like to utilize this active skill because, again, it's a full board changer, and the heal, would, while not necessarily helpful, might potentially be justifiable if you weapon assist him for Miru team, so you get those on stat transfers for poison resist, which Raytheon or Sasuke's cannot do. Again, I touched upon why Ideal is more of an ideal choice for most teams, and Karn technically does have high damage output for Yusuke teams, but Karn's base active has no synergy whatsoever. Yusuke wants to have, or needs to have, light and water orbs present, and Karn's base active does not do that whatsoever. So you want to probably inherit over top of him, but because it's an 11 turn cooldown, can be a little challenging to do so, so it just becomes a bit of a problematic situation overall for the most part. So he is strong, but Ideal does definitely eclipse him, and he just doesn't necessarily have the best team to fit on overall. So if another leader is released that likes to have light-based cards with no specific color activation, Karn might shine a little brighter. Now, in his assist form, I already mentioned that 60% poison resist is incredibly powerful. And that is because in a lot of endgame content, most of the very dangerous spawns generate poison orbs. And being able to resist them 100%, so basically a Raytheon or a Karn plus a Sasuke or another one of those before mentioned ones, will give you 100+% resistance. And when you can trivialize those spawns like that, you can dance around in them much more longer, you can stall in them potentially, as well as not being able to dedicate other active skills to removing poison orbs. So a large part of the Monster Hunter Collab's appeal now is going to be rolling for Raytheon, who is significantly stronger than Karn as a weapon assist, because Raytheon gives you 2 turns of delay with a poison, which is much more universally helpful by comparison than Karn's active skill would be, because Karn's active skill may not be activatable on a large variety of teams. But with that being said, Yogg, Miro, and Edward can still greatly benefit from this weapon assist because they will be able to actually gain stat transfer, unlike a stat transfer would not be possible from Raytheon. So, I'm going to talk about Nicol Bolus. I hope I'm saying that correctly, but they are actually quite an interesting and powerful card. So their active skill is 100% damage reduction for 1 turn, and then 2 turns haste. So that effectively amounts to 3 turns of stalling because, well, technically you can't die that turn, so you can set up your board, tidy it up, that's 1 turn. 2 turns haste means 3 turns. So a net 3 turns of stalling, which can be beneficial in some cases, as well as for the fact that you're using double leaders, you are able to effectively kind of 6 turns of extra stalling somewhere in a dungeon, provided you can charge it up. Their leader skill is quite interesting. It's combining many different elements that kind of makes them feel like several different leaders. So it's a no Skyfall leader, and then you get 4 times attack when there are 8 or less orbs on the map. Let me read this out because I'm getting confused in my head. So you get 4 times attack when there are 8 or less orbs remaining on the board after matching, and then plus 1 times attack for every missing orb afterwards. So basically, he goes up to 12 times attack when there is no orbs left remaining on the board. I kind of copy-pasted that from Pad X. Maybe it sounds a little weird. But basically, if you remove every single orb on the board, you have 12 times damage. So double leader is 144 times. And then, on top of that, you have 2.5 times attack and then 25% damage reduction when reaching 5 or more combos, which you should always be able to match 5 or more combos. So you're going to have this permanent damage reduction shield, as well as a high and quickly scaling multiplier that caps out at 900 times damage, which is kind of ridiculous. So looking at his awakenings, he's got double time extend, only 1 skill boost and a skill bind resist, and then 5 TPAs. So TPAs are generally lackluster awakenings, but on his team, they're actually not the end of the world, because you're not necessarily going for pure combos. You're going to be blobbing a lot of things, and blobbing sometimes entails making matching TPAs. And because of that, Nicol Bolus will be dealing spectacular amounts of burst damage for himself as well as your friend leader, so that can be something nice to keep in mind. However, you only have a single skill boost and an 18 turn base cooldown, so it can be a little challenging to actually charge that skill up. So you're kind of a little restricted in the type of active skills you can bring into a dungeon, which is definitely a drawback. Now, when he is converted to his weapon assist form, he grants full bind immunity. So full bind immunity is pretty nice, and I'll explain a little bit more why, or how you can actually utilize that, and also why it may not necessarily be the greatest thing in the world. Now, this leader skill is very powerful. It's 900 times damage with dual leaders, but it has a very nice scaling component, so you have damage reduction, and you also have a pretty much guaranteed 43.75% damage reduction all the time, which is pretty nice. Now, the active skill is quite powerful if you're able to charge it up. TPAs are synergistic with his leader skill, and again, bind immunity if you're really desperate through his weapon assist form. But the biggest drawback is that he's not bind immune, so that can constrict the types of content you may be able to play through, or at least the subs that you have to bring to counteract that, but there are some tricks you can use to overcome this hurdle. The active skill is a long 18-turn cooldown, again with 1 skill boost, and then if you own Amun, he kind of somewhat invalidates the need for Nicol Bolus, because Amun can deal so much more damage, but is not as potent as a traditional leader, because Nicol Bolus has that nice passive damage reduction. So, personally speaking, the best leaders we have currently available for no Skyfalls, as well as leaving X number of orbs on the board for bonus damage are Amon and Kaede, and both of them do different things and have different activation requirements. So Amon is the ultimate glass cannon. He does 10,000 times attack damage with double leaders when you match exactly 7 combos, no more, no less, as well as leaving 3 or less orbs on the board. Now, that is a relatively challenging activation requirement. It's not necessarily possible on any given board because if you have, say, 2 darks and 2 hearts, you never can fully activate. But I guess as a consolation, both Amon and Kaede still get 100 times damage when you leave their respective number of orbs left on the board. By comparison, if Bolus is able to leave no orbs on the board, he gets 144 times multiplier, so he does actually outpace them from just pure full board changer swipe farming points of view. Now, Amon is a glass cannon leader, which means he has no defensive multiplier, as well as no forms of damage reduction or extra healing, so on and so forth. So you have to plan out your dungeon quite carefully and try to obviously avoid taking damage when it's not necessary. On the flip side, Kaede only caps out at 625 times damage when you match 2 wood combos and have 6 or less orbs left on the board. So a much more easy to activate leader skill in the sense of you can leave more orbs on the board, but having 2 wood combos can be quite challenging because a given board doesn't necessarily always have 6 wood orbs, which can make it a little frustrating and inconsistent because Kaede's damage reduction component is tied to matching wood combos. So, taking that into consideration, Bolus feels like a significant upgrade from Kaede because of the fact that you always have your damage reduction. You always can make 5 or more combos, and then it's a matter of just matching enough orbs alongside of it to scale up, and you will match and exceed Kaede at some point, so that is quite an exciting aspect. Now, Bolus can definitely be played as a speed farming leader because, again, 144 times from a swipe does massive amounts of damage, but you can always use like a full board changer as well as like say a row generating active skill to match additional combos to fulfill your combo requirement clause, which will give you that 900 times damage, as well as the fact that you can technically scale and control your damage to a certain extent, which is beneficial and meaningful for certain encounters or dungeons. Now, obviously the biggest drawback is that he only has a single skill boost and a terribly long base cooldown, so you are kind of restricted in terms of what active skills you are able to actually bring, and that's where Kaede and Amon excel by comparison. Now, if you are planning to utilize Bolus in a traditional leader sense, he kind of has some similarities to Anubis in that both hit 900 times damage, but I would definitely say Bolus is much more consistent overall because you always have a multiplier no matter what. Like you can pretty much, a given board will almost always have at least 7 combos. It's truly rare to have 6 combos, but even so, even if you somehow only can match 6, you can blob your combos anyways, and then somehow you can match your whole multiplier anyways. Furthermore, you get that damage reduction component, which Anubis does not enjoy. So Anubis definitely suffers from heavy lack of consistency, whereas Bolus has amazing consistency by comparison. So it can be quite beneficial to play him through traditional content. Like he will be quite powerful. You just need to take into consideration the fact that he is vulnerable to binds. Now, if you are vulnerable to binds, there are a couple workarounds. You can utilize him in solo mode and then take the leader bind immune badge and then pair with a Bolus who has the weapon assist inherited on top of themselves. That way your friend's leader is fully bind immune and you are bind immune through the solo mode badge. So that is a very plausible workaround solution for those who don't have duplicates to inherit around. And in all things considered, Bolus and probably Blue Hunter are possibly the strongest bind immune leaders we have currently nowadays. So I honestly probably wouldn't make your Bolus into his weapon assist evolution, especially if it's your only copy. Maybe if you had extra duplicates, maybe you could to make your own a little stronger. But again, that's really edging on the point of luxury because most valuable or top tier cards are already bind immune. Next we have, I can't pronounce her name still, but she is an incredible chase card from this collab for several different reasons. Her active skill is the exact same as Odin Dragon's. It's a 50% max HP heal, as well as full bind and awoken bind recovery. Furthermore, they provide 1 turn of haste. So that's an incredibly high value active skill on only a 9-turn cooldown. But the good news does not stop there. She has a very powerful leader skill that somewhat rivals Diabolus. So she changes the board to 7x6 as well But then she actually does have a higher multiplier than Diablos, 9 versus 8.5. But you have to actually match a set of red and blue combos. And that Color Clause activation is her biggest downfall because it severely kind of cripples the types of teams and subpool you can actually utilize, as well as the board changes, as well as void damage penetration cards you are able to actually utilize. So in terms of the big pros of her, well, it's an inheritable Odin Dragon with a weapon assist evolution that provides a cloud resist awakening. But the fact that you can inherit an Odin Dragon style active skill is tremendously powerful, because Odin Dragon has become somewhat mandatory in a lot of endgame content because there's no alternative to actually using him. You can't even inherit him around. So being able to inherit this card around is valuable because it can dramatically open up team building potential. You can utilize a card that you prefer to use and have them carry that bind clearing active skill instead of actually running Odin Dragon or this girl alongside of them. Furthermore, she can sometimes replace Diablos because she does have a higher scaling multiplier, and in certain situations it might be better. And the most notable reason is because she actually has a valuable active skill which frees up a sub slot because you don't need to run Odin Dragon, whereas Diablos has a terrible active skill with a horribly long cooldown. So depending on the dungeon at hand, you may want Diablos or you may want this girl. It all really depends, as well as on the types of cards you can run. Now, other great things going for her are 3 skill boosts, so it helps charge up active skills much quicker, as well as having the new 10 combo awakening. So the 10 combo awakening provides a personal 5 times damage when you hit 10 or more combos. So that's obviously amazing on 7x6 because you should almost always be able to hit 10 or more combos from a given board, but it has horrible inconsistency issues on a regular 6x5 board because they only have 30 orbs, which means maximum 10 combos. So you'll oftentimes be praying to Skyfalls to actually have those orbs fall down. So she is kind of a multi-facet card, and I kind of want to examine the 2 major scenarios where you actually would be wanting to use her. So, as already mentioned, Odin Dragon is an incredible card for his bind clearing capabilities, as well as having huge weighted stats through his limit breaking and level 10 level 10 power, as well as having reasonably powerful awakenings alongside of it. But the biggest issue is sometimes you may not necessarily want to run Odin Dragon on every single type of team because it may not have the perfect synergy, but you had to do so because of his active skill. So being able to inherit this card from Magic the Gathering Collab means you can open up various team building options, or you can even run her as a sub depending on the type of team you are using and whether or not you can actually tap into that 10 combo awakening. But the main drawback is that she, like any other Magic the Gathering card, have horrible weighted stats. It's only around 904, whereas Odin Dragon is way beefier by comparison. Odin Dragon just eclipses her in every way, shape, and form in terms of stat distribution. So unless you're using her on a 7x6 board, she's definitely not going to be worthwhile because she won't be contributing that much, as well as the fact that she is, well, significantly squishier and softer by comparison. But if you inherit her, you solve a lot of those problems, as well as providing that cloud resist awakening if you make her into the weapon assist form. Now, comparing her to Diablos, she can be a viable alternative because both form a 7x6 board. So those extra 12 orbs mean you have a potential 4 more combos for a maximum total of 14 barring Skyfalls. So a lot of combo-based teams are significantly happier, as well as the fact that she can utilize the 10 combo awakening and deal very meaningful amounts of damage on her own. Unfortunately, her actual base stats are significantly lower, but the biggest hurdle of them all is the fact that she needs to match fire and water combos. That does not mean you have to run a whole team of fire water cards, you just have to have those 2 combos being matched. And she takes care of both those colors due to her primary and sub attribute. But this greatly restricts the type of board changes you can utilize. Like, yes, you can use Urd or Mori Montanari or Weld, but there are not as many desirable options, and this also dramatically cuts down on your void damage penetration cards available. Like, if I were to think of all the water and fire void damage penetration cards possible, Ilmina is probably your best bet, but Ilmina herself is not necessarily the greatest choice because her base active skill is not helpful for your team. Having a board of red and light would normally be good for herself making boxes, but it doesn't fully activate her leader skills, so there's a big problem there, as well as water having really nothing to really draw upon because none of them have desirable secondary awakenings to help bolster their overall damage output. Now, some may argue that Yusuke can be used because that water sub-attribute after using another board changer can possibly deal some damage, but at that point, your damage is already heavily reduced, so it's still not the greatest. And also, Yusuke, like Ilmona, has a board changer that's not synergistic overall. In addition to that, Diabolus has, again, much better weighted stats, as well as the Guard Break Awakening, which may or may not be situationally helpful depending on the type of dungeon you're playing through, but if it's something like Arena 4, Guard Break is actually quite helpful for Jewels of Creations, as well as some of the other high defense spawns in the dungeon. Now, all of this may sound quite negative, which they are, of course, but this Magic the Gathering card still has some shining aspects overall. Like the higher damage multiplier, sure, it's a little bit, but maybe it makes the difference in some cases. But she has a far superior active skill compared to Diabolus. And because of that, you're able to actually cut back on utilizing Odin Dragon as the mandatory sub because she already brings that bind and awoken bind clearing aspect. Furthermore, even if you don't need that active skill, you can easily inherit something over top of her because she only has 9 turn cooldown and she has 3 instead of Diabolus' 2 skill boosts, so you're able to charge up skills much quicker by comparison. So this can be a distinct advantage because Diabolus is kind of pushed into the scenario where it probably will inherit the Raytheon weapon assist, which is still a good thing, but you're not necessarily going to have an extra active skill to work around with, which is definitely a drawback. So all in all, Diabolus is still, in my opinion, a stronger leader because he can activate off any given board, has better access to void damage penetration cards, as well as having much beefier weighted stats, but of course, you can still kind of pick and choose because the beauty of 7x6 leaders is that you don't actually need to own one yourself to take advantage of them. You can simply pair with a friend who has a 7x6 leader and choose either Diabolus or this girl depending on the dungeon at hand and what will greatly more so benefit your team overall. Now, in terms of the weapon assist evolution, I may be loath to suggest that because if you don't have Diabolus, she's going to be your best 7x6 leader available. So you want to obviously be able to still utilize her in that regards. So you should only really make her weapon assist if you have Diabolus already, because you're almost always going to want to run Diabolus over her. But even then, it's just more so being able to transfer that Cloud Resist Awakening if used as an inherit. Even if I rolled one myself, and I do have a Diabolus on my main account, I would be somewhat hesitant to actually inherit her or transfer to this weapon assist form because there may be some situations where I want to actually use her over Diabolus for certain dungeons and scenarios. And the last 6-star card in this event is, I can't say the name, I'm not going to try, but their active skill is 2 times recovery for 3 turns, as well as remove all locked orb status and then change the board to wood, dark, and hard orbs on an 11 turn cooldown. Their leader's skill is 2 times health and 4 times attack, and then bonus 2 and dual leaders 4 seconds of orb movement time, along with 3 times bonus attack when matching wood and dark combos. So you hit 144 times multiplier, which is okay. It has a little bit of restriction of wood and dark combos, but that should be manageable for the most part. You do have that time extend, but because you have no built-in recovery, it's going to be challenging to heal up after large attacks, and considering they have low-weighted recovery stats as well as low-weighted stats, it's going to be hard to heal up. So yes, some may argue that you can use that active skill to help correct the bad recovery, but that's kind of a bit of a waste. You want to use that active skill to burst and kill things, not just necessarily heal up, so it can be a little problematic overall. But in terms of their awakenings, they're kind of similar in a sense to Amatsu, and I say this because both of them are double 7 combo cards with a follow-up attack awakening, and they both can unlock orbs, and that's very important because up until this point, Amatsu is the only follow-up attack card, I believe, that could unlock the board. So you could use Amatsu's orb unlock and then board changer to help you make a nicer looking board to combo and follow-up attack with. But this card here will do the same thing, but also remove hazards at the same time, which can be incredibly valuable as well. So there is definitely a lot of merit to this card for the most part, but the biggest problem is their active skill is not helpful to the widest variety of teams. Like I already mentioned, Yusuke and Edward really want to be light-based, as well as you can need light and water to activate anyways, so a board changer of wood, dark, and heal orbs is not necessarily the greatest thing overall. So it can be a little problematic. It kind of pushes you into a corner of, can you really utilize them effectively? That's the biggest issue. Kind of like how Karn is, do they have a desirable home to actually use them on? But overall, they are still definitely a powerful card, and their weapon assist form does grant a skill boost, and being able to grant an additional skill boost is a big deal because a lot of teams are kind of built to have a certain number of skill boosts to have certain actives come up in time. But being able to inherit this card and gain an extra skill boost can possibly open up your team to better team building compositions. So it can be valuable, but of course this definitely borders very much on the edge of luxury in terms of converting a 6-star card with pretty strong awakenings into a pure inherit just for that extra skill boost. And the thing about skill boosts is that they're only helpful at the beginning of the dungeon. After that point, they don't have any value. So in a longer dungeon, a skill boost awakening transferred over really does not do much good as opposed to something that's like full bind immunity or cloud resist, so on and so forth. Now, already, like the only other skill boost transferable card is Almonds, so technically you do save 750,000 monster points, but kind of niche. So all the now we come to the 5-star cards. So that was very long, but there is quite a bit to say because all the cards do have a lot of detail in them, which I think is quite interesting. But the 5-star cards are a lot more simple by comparison. Like, for the most part, they all have terrible base stats. They're all around 700-ish, so you're generally not going to want to use them as a sub. So you got to really look at their active skill and see if they can be a valuable inherit. So the first card is Shivan, I don't know, Shiva with an N dragon. So this card here has a full defense void for 1 turn, or defense break for 1 turn, and then giving dragon type cards 3 times attack for 1 turn on 13 turn cooldown. So it's kind of like Balboa, but we all know that Balboa's base active skill is not necessarily the most amazing in the world. It can be situationally useful, but not that great overall. So Shivan Dragon, like, it's possibly useful in niche scenarios or like under those right circumstances. Like if you are fighting like say the Metatrons in 3-player arena or the Jewels of Creation in Arena 4, this can be definitely very valuable. Now, again, we have guard break, we have very high multipliers, so we may not necessarily need to have this defense break. And also, you only can defense break against spawns that don't have status voids. So there are a lot of things that can prevent you from actually utilizing this inherit very well. Furthermore, they have a 13 turn-based cooldown, whereas Balboa is, I think, 11. So we have options that are faster and easier to inherit on top. Now, some people might want to use them as a sub because they do have 2 skill boosts. They have Double Devil Killer and Machine Killer. But at this point in time, there's no truly lethal or dangerous spawn that you need those 3 killer awakenings for. But being red does open up new potentials for devil killing, because right now devil killing is primarily enjoyed by Mito and Chazelle, which are both wood. So Shivan Dragon does gain a little bit of an edge possibly, as well as having obviously synergy for red row farming teams. Sarah Angel is not angelic whatsoever. They're pretty much garbage overall. They remove Locked Orb status, which is kind of nice, but lots of other cards can do that. And then they change Wood, Jammer, and Poisons into Light Orbs on a 7-turn cooldown. So that's all it's doing. So if it's not unlocking orbs or removing hazards, it's a pretty horrible active to inherit over top. And in all honesty, you have much stronger options to actually utilize instead of this active skill. Like you can use board refreshes, you can use like cards like Amatsu. Like there are a lot of other options, or Yusuke, the blue and green Sonya. Like there are better ways to unlock orbs, Diao Chan. Like so many come to mind. So it's hard to justify their usage, and they're just a sad card overall. Gideon Jura? Their active skill is 35% damage reduction for 3 turns, as well as +1 combo count for 3 turns. So you're basically combining 2 middling to weak active skill components into a single active skill. So maybe you think that could be kind of efficient, but unfortunately it just makes the cooldown longer, and in all honesty, it's rare to actually need both components at the same time. You're probably just better off, if you need damage reduction, picking a stronger shield. If you need bonus combos, pick a stronger plus combo count card. It's really hard to justify using both at the same time, and the only real team that I can that comes to mind is using Dual Anubis, because the +1 combo count for 3 turns does somewhat guarantee you always activate at least some damage, because a given board could have 7 or 8 combos on average, and being able to have +1 means you hit 8 or 9, which means Anubis can activate his lowest multiplier potential that does meaningful amounts of damage. So it's a niche scenario where you want to use or need to use that, but for the most part, it's not that great, unfortunately. So, like, again, combining 2 weak things does not make a good thing. That's just kind of the moral of the story here. Jace Belleron. It's basically 1 turn delay to all enemies and then inflict poison damage. So basically this feels like Raytheon, but this Jace does not have a weapon assist evolution, so he's not transferring those sweet 60% poison resist or anything else helpful over. So Raytheon is just pretty much better in every way, shape, and form, because in all honesty, a single turn delay with poison, it's mostly helpful against resolve spawns, most notably spawns like the Norns, like basically Skald, Erd, and Verdandi in Arena 4. So sure, to poison a card and have a small delay can be useful in that regards. Like, you can just brute combo, you don't have to actually make the heart column, but it is really not that helpful overall. Like, it's not necessarily. We have follow-up attack, they're just better options. Now, on the flip side, Lillian Vess is significantly more powerful than most of the other 5 stars because she has applications, but the problem is her applications are used for more elite speed farming teams, which is not practical or applicable for the average player. So she's able to inflict a dark nuke damage equal to 50 times your total team's attack to all enemies. So you can easily button through a lot of spawns that have potentially even 1,000,000 health, because you're able to stack up multiple cards, multiple high attack dark cards, and then therefore Lillian is able to deal very large amounts of damage. But on top of that, she forms a row of dark orbs at the top and locks them. So that locking aspect is actually quite meaningful because it prevents them from being changed away after, like, say, various bosses' preemptives that spawn less than favorable orbs, or at least take away dark orbs. They will still be there. But the fact that you form the row at the top means you could save dark orbs at the bottom, and then boom, you have the dark row at the top, dark orbs at the bottom. You can make significantly large blobs or whatever pattern you need to deal massive amounts of damage. So effectively, you're able to kill 2 floors with a single active, which is great for longer content where you need to kind of conserve your actives as much as possible. Now, again, this is only for players that really want to farm things as efficiently as possible, and they generally have access to Makoto, I think that's how you say it, who basically scales off of 5+ linked dark orbs, so 6 is obviously more than enough to hit explosive amounts of damage. So basically the general idea is you want to inherit her on something with massive a massive attack stat. So something like Dark Ideal, or the new Vajah, I can't say their name, but they have double co-op boost Awakening, and they're dark, so they actually hit the highest level of attack value for dark cards. So inheriting Lillian Vass somewhere on the team with those cards on there is actually meaningful and powerful. Chandra Nalar is another valuable card, but again, it's only applicable for people who have really Motoko for efficient farming purposes. So their active skill does 10% true gravity, which is not that helpful, but they change the left and rightmost columns into fire orbs. And that means you spawn 5, 5, or 10 total orbs. So again, the same idea is you are able to actually deal very meaningful amounts of damage with a 5 linked fire orb match, and then do the same for the next floor. So speed farming purposes, this is very fast and very efficient. And it's assuming you need to actually burst modestly high in case where Lillian Vass would not be as practical overall. So it's kind of just options for making this type of farming leader even more efficient. But again, for the average player, not so great. And then last card in the whole Magic the Gathering collab is Nissa Ravine. And she provides 4 times burst for wood cards for 1 turn on a 10-turn cooldown. So in terms of burst active skill cooldowns, hers is very short as well as being quite high. So obviously that can be very meaningful and powerful for wood teams, especially in solo mode when you're very concerned about your number of skill boosts you have available. Because you can inherit her on something that has a reasonably short base active skill, you have just enough skill boosts for her to charge up, and it can definitely burst incredibly hard, provided you only need the burst for 1 turn. So obviously using something like Gemstone Princesses or the Wise Dragons are more powerful or more efficient overall, but if you needed something to come up in only 10 turns, this is your girl to use, because again, it's just the fastest charging for such a high burst level, and there's no secondary effect, so it doesn't add on extra turns to the cooldown. So definitely a useful card to have overall. Great to have in your box. Like, there are going to be like challenges, like say like spin-offs of, like, say the Zeus campaign, the Hera campaign, Satan campaign, where you need to have active skills come up super quickly, and you're using, say, a wood-based team like Coyote, and you need to burst. So, in conclusion, the Magic the Gathering collab is quite exciting overall, not just for nostalgia purposes, but for the fact that lots of the cards have interesting value. But for the most part, the 6-star cards, while useful, are not as meta-defining or game-breaking as other collabs have been in the past. The big idea is that they are all useful and valuable in basically some way, shape, or form. So you're not necessarily going to roll a troll diamond, which can be nice because I remember for like say YYH, really only Yusuke was good. Everything else is kind of like, eh. So let me know what you think about the Magic the Gathering collab in the comments below. Do you think you'll be rolling heavily? And if so, who do you hope to acquire? And if so, what form do you plan to use them on, as well as what types of teams? I wish you all the best of luck in your own pad adventures, and happy puzzling.